We are very similar, it seems like. You're a couple years older than me, but other than that, pretty much the same track. Strangely positive life change around the time of COVID. Um, and, we've got Jordan Peterson interests at the beginning of our sort of awakening. I wrote it down in my notes as like coming to age in a similar fashion.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to talk to you because of that pretty much. You did several interviews with Jordan Hall, who I've been following since he came across my radar with Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke. And so I was like, well, who's this guy that gets to talk to Jordan?
Yeah.
And then you were talking about education and, all the fun stuff that Jordan talks about, the meta crisis, the nature of the universe, et cetera. And
just those little things. Yeah.
Yeah. Very simple, straightforward. Actually, not. He talks about complexity. And so all of that to say, I wasn't intending for this to be biographical on your part, so it's not really an interview, but if you could just give people a synopsis of
Sure.
Wherever you want to start, just how you got to where you are and where you are.
I mean, yeah, quickly, like I grew up in North Carolina. I have had I would say a pretty normal, like East Coast, Mid-Atlantic, early 2000s, white American kid childhood, like until age 10 or 11. And my parents got divorced when I was 11. And that was like a pretty big, like if I think of like a big sort of tumultuous event in my childhood after 10 years of pretty like stable, like we were upper middle class, a lot in my extended family, like a lot of money and wealth. And so just like the first 10 years of my life, I was a spoiled little comfortable kid. Started playing tennis from a young age would be the other relevant thing. And was very competitive and serious about that from age of 7 or 8. And then my parents got divorced at 11. My family kind of fell apart. And when, throughout my teenage years, got increasingly serious about tennis, that was like the number one thing in my life. And my home life, my family life was really just like propped up, I would say, by that like solid economic foundation, especially connections with like extended family and things like that, and like healthy networks and peer groups and things like that. But in terms of the actual relationality, like my home life was really, really unhealthy. And we didn't go to church my entire life. We're not believers. There's some interesting lore that I don't know the details of, and at some point I hope to like actually have the courage to talk to my mother about this. But like my mom, I think, was really part of the caught up in the Jesus revolution of the whatever that was, the late 60s, 70s. And so because we went to an Episcopal church, I guess I was baptized there when I was born. And we were attending until I was at least 2 or 3. Like my brothers have actual memories of attending. I don't, but I know that was largely driven by my mom. And then at a certain point, we just stopped going. I think if I had to guess, and I have some understanding here just from knowing my mom and my family, like that was largely driven by like the liberalization of the Episcopal Church generally, not as a reaction to it, like anti-reaction, but more like I would say my mom and my family generally in that regard are proof of the end stage of that liberalization being like the question of, okay, why do I really need God if we just are basically like a liberal social movement, and everything is the same way it is in the culture. And so I think they just stopped like seeing the need to like, why are we going, we have tennis tournaments and we have different things to do on weekends. Like, why are we going to this place on Sundays? And, we can be for liberal politics and all these different things and centrist politics, whatever it is. And the general positive movement of society without going to church. Like that would be kind of my guess as to why we stopped. And so I grew up definitely as part of like a very secular, very like liberal in like like Obama era liberal progressive sort of East Coast elitist mindset and family. Progressed to the point I go to college to play tennis at the University of Mississippi. So had a real, it was my first big, like I had traveled a lot internationally, different things like that. Like I knew people from varied backgrounds, had family from Texas, all this stuff, but going to live in Mississippi was a crazy change. Like, it's like from North Carolina is the South, but you lived in South Carolina for a little bit, I think. So you may recognize this. It's probably somewhat true of South Carolina, but to a less degree. Like North Carolina is right on that border between. You have a lot of like mid-Atlantic, like DC kind of people that are elitist in that way and informed by that culture. You have a lot of like Northeastern transplants who just come a little further south for the weather. And so they're much more like typical old guard, New England kind of mindset and culture. And then you have like, especially on the more rural side, like real salt of the earth South, like Southern people. I mean, it's all just mixed up together. And in my small town in Pinehurst, it was very much that way. Like you knew people of all stripes. And I moved to Mississippi and it's like not like that. Like pretty much everybody at Ole Miss was from Mississippi. All my American friends off the tennis team, probably 95% of them were from Mississippi and were very Southern and parents extremely conservative. Many of them raised cultural Christian, but not really practicing, like very late stage Southern conservatism. And then my tennis team was comprised of 9 countries. So I had this juxtaposition of like the most like conservative, like single-minded population on one side, like to a large degree, and then my team, which was mostly Europeans, but guys from all over the world, India, Australia, New Zealand, like everywhere, South Africa. And so like a plethora of different like worldviews and ways of being raised. Well, maybe not worldviews. I'd say most of them were like, especially because of tennis being such a global sport and these being elite tennis players who travel internationally, just like a typical globalist secular mindset and worldview. And so played tennis at Ole Miss, and that was from 2015 to 18. And it was during that time, eschewing most of the details, like that I started to have largely, because of some positive influence from people at Ole Miss, like a teammate from Mississippi who was a strong believer, but also a girlfriend from home and different, a pastor from home and different things. Really cool story that you can hear elsewhere, but was softened to the idea of belief through just like the love and the beauty that was like embodied in these people that I was in relationship with, alongside, of course, all their flaws and normal human things. And that was one side, but then the other really, really important side, which is where you and I cross over, is like after being sort of softened, like I still had this, like from my upbringing, I have a family full of, really smart, really hard-headed, strong, opinionated thinkers. And that side of me clicked in where it's like, okay, you've been softened because of these people you love and who love you really well, and you want what they have, both in their character and in their lives and their relationships that you don't have, but it all still has to make sense, and that's where I think I started probably on like Wikipedia, like what are the arguments for and against God, and or somebody said, my friend sending me a podcast. It was like some like pretty like lowbrow Protestant sermon about like the reliability of the Bible, but it was enough to like kind of pique my interest. Where I'm like, oh, like there's like there's actually some good arguments here. There's like some good food for thought about the Bible, and then I stumble onto, via funny thing, like I was listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast. I don't know if you ever listen to Tim Ferriss, but yeah. Like he's the OG podcaster, like more OG than Joe Rogan. People think Joe started this whole thing. Tim is like OG podcasting. And I was a huge listener of his, and he had on a guy named George Raveling, who actually just died, I think, a week or two ago, who's a legendary basketball coach for UCLA, and also was the the Nike employee who signed Michael Jordan. So super cool dude. And I'm listening to his episode with Tim, and he's a huge reader, or was a huge reader. And Tim asked him, what is the book you give away the most? Which is a great question. I think you asked me that. Great question. And
yeah, that was ripped right from Tim. Just stealing
yes.
that.
Okay. So okay. So he asked George that, and George's answer was, and this is like in 2017, so it was like right after this book came out, or right as it was coming out. He said, "Man, these days I keep like at least 10 to 12 copies of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life on deck to give out." And I was like, "Man, this guy seems incredibly wise, brilliant. Like, I need to, he said a bunch of nice things about the book. I'm like, I need to check out this book and check out this guy." And so I started looking him up on YouTube, and I kind of simultaneously ordered 12 Rules and discovered the biblical lectures and some of his other lectures when he was on the book tour for that book at the same time. And so I basically just, this is right around the time I graduated from college, and I'm playing professional tennis. Low level professional tennis, lest you think I was a big deal. I wasn't. And there's a lot of travel involved and a lot of alone time there. So I'm like just eating up Jordan Peterson material, reading the book, but especially like locked into the first biblical lecture. Just like, I mean, blew me to bits. Cause I'm like, it was just like the first, you could maybe say it was the first like real experience of humility I'd ever had. Like, you have experience of humility growing up, you get embarrassed, older kids make fun of you, things, something goes wrong with a girl, whatever it is. But like, I was maybe always like smart enough or aware enough to realize like many of those moments of humility I could justify by being like, oh, well, I'm growing up, I'm the younger kid, or I'm, whatever it is. They were wrong, I was right. But I listened to Jordan Peterson. I had this visceral, maybe it was a moment, maybe it was like over a few weeks or months, I can't really quite remember, where I just was like, it was like you're scuba diving and you go over the edge of a shelf and you're looking out into the abyss. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, I actually have no idea what I'm talking about. Like, I've never known. Yeah. I've never known anything. I've always just been riding off of like stuff that I absorbed from my parents and the culture and my competitive competency in like sports and academia and social life to like make me feel like I have some like grip on like reality and what this world is and what my life is and who I am and all this stuff. And it turns out like I didn't know anything. And that was like a really intense experience of humility, where you're just like, oh, and it all came through this experience of watching Jordan Peterson pace back and forth on stage with no notes and just talk for 2.5 hours about the founding myth of Western culture in Genesis 1. And I was just like brought to my knees. And that wasn't like, I didn't come to Christ. Like, there were a lot of things that led to that, but that was like such a catalytic experience, was listening to him and realizing like, I look down on religious people. I look down on all these things, for many good reasons, but actually I've never really engaged with like someone at the level of erudition that Jordan Peterson was bringing to the forefront there, and then connecting like in such material and relevant ways to like how I should live my life, in ways that also answered the many ways in which my life was going wrong. Because there were really hard things happening too, like a big breakup with my girlfriend dumped me because I was not a man. I had no idea what I was doing, which you've discerned so far. And tennis was a huge idol in my life, that like when I had a really bad injury, and there was just this huge vacuum. And here was Jordan Peterson to be like, there are actually time-tested ways that seem obvious, but that we have lost touch with, that are based in this text and this religion, if you want to call it that, and the teachings of Christ and all those who have based their teachings and their wisdom and their writings off of this revelation of Christ and the biblical writings. and that can lead to something like a true manhood and a flourishing of true humanity. And I just had that reset happen over a space, like a pretty condensed space of like 6 to 8 months. And there's some other crazy, there was a rather large mushroom trip involved there, and that was not trivial. Like, I would say, I think Jordan once quoted the research, maybe in the biblical lectures, where he said, like, they've, some studies have found that a large dose of LSD or psilocybin can have the odd effect of boosting your trait openness by like up to one or two full standard deviations. And I'm like, yeah, that totally happened with me.
And it stays. It's
yeah,
permanent.
and sticks. Yeah. And I think I've since hypothesized that, at least in my case, but maybe in all cases, I now think of it more as a recovery than like put arbitrary numbers on it. Say I was at a 50, and after that I was at a 70. I think the way I would view it now is that, like, probably as a kid I was much more like a 70, and then life and all of the things that you could spend endless hours talking about brought me down to like this artificial level of a 50, and then this helped break up some of the ice and allowed me to then or rocketed me rather back up to this 70 or maybe a little bit higher. And that all happens. Yeah. And Jordan Peterson was there to make sure that I didn't fall victim to all of the bad parts of psychedelic culture. So I'll stop there, but that's kind of where I got to the Jordan Peterson stuff.
I just wanted to jump in to say, when I was listening, I heard there's a longer form interview that goes through your story on Christian Baxter's channel. And you were talking about this idea of like a sort of regression back to the prior openness that you had as a child. And it obviously sounds like childlikeness, like a childlike faith or whatever. And that concept to me was really hit home, because I think so much of what I respect in, say, like Modern Wisdom, the podcast Chris Williamson does, is this idea of like setting up your life and the conditions of your days to unleash, unveil, reveal who it is that you are. And there's a lot of people sort of around that are encouraging maybe to play a bit of a sort of finite game. It's all about money or success, status. But I really do respect that at the core of Modern Wisdom, that he's really, because he always says it's like a thinly veiled autobiography, the podcast. And so it's just everything he's fascinated in, interested in. He's talking about it, but he's really wrestling with it personally. And I think for him, just what I know about his backstory, being like bullied as a kid, everyone has those environmental factors that sort of pile on top of who it is that you are. And you start to mediate, as in you start to filter yourself towards the environment that you're in, and navigate whatever it is. Like for you, your parents' divorce, even just the family culture coming, you tried to say, like from the North Carolina amalgam of cultures there, you're working through what it means to be in that situation and to be valuable according to a certain sort of cultural directive, like this is what we value in this culture, and so this is what we want you to be like. And you're like, okay, because that's what kids are like. And the way the brain works is by like you have all of these connections, and then you start trimming them away to hone in on the connections that are relevant to you. So as you get more specialized, like you have tennis connections in your brain that I don't, and that's by pruning away the unnecessary connections in those particular movements, anticipations, all of that. And I would say, like, this, I'm not recommending mushrooms. I do know that you prayed, and so you're sort of like on that spiritual journey prior to. It
Yeah,
wasn't just a substance. It wasn't just whatever. It wasn't just recreational, let's say. And so for you, there was we know it's neurological, like regrowth or something. Like let's
totally.
throw this up to 11, and then you get to remake those cuts, the pruning of your other neurological connections. So anyway, I just find that interesting because, well, for lots of reasons.
Well, I think a great metaphor for it that I've heard before, and I may have mentioned this with Christian, is I think it was a Netflix documentary, but one of the sort of fathers of psychedelic research likened it to fresh snow on a mountain, right? Like you have if you're skiing, snowboarding, whatever, like you get late in the day, there's like all the worn tracks from and fresh snow just brings a new endless possibilities of like which way am I going to go down the mountain, like which I don't know. And so I've always liked that metaphor because it's really, I think, true to experience. And like you said, yeah, I prayed beforehand, and I knew, like I had listened to listened to that Peterson lecture where I'd heard about this openness and all this stuff beforehand. And so it was pretty intentionally like, hey, I'm in this place, heartbreaking things have happened, I'm open to all this stuff, but I also know that I have very worn tracks, to keep in that metaphor, and I want some fresh snow. So like, which even now it's funny looking back at, like, I know the dangers of that, and I view it as being such a like utilitarian, pragmatic mindset to have about these things. But it definitely had the desired effect, probably because I prayed earnestly about it. But
yeah, it's funny that you say that because I've been thinking about that phrase a lot. It just snowed a couple times up here in New York, and
nice. I'm jealous.
Yeah, it was really nice. It's not going to be nice in 6 weeks, and we'll be in snow for the rest of forever. But the in the Bible it talks about your sins being washed away like white as snow, and that concept I think is very similar because I didn't really. So when it comes to psychedelics, there's a lot of like psychedelic assisted therapies that are being developed right now, and people are really interested in these things. And what you're saying about the fresh layer of snow is a great analogy for it. But so in Texas, Rick Perry's kind of championing this to help out veterans, because in Texas, I mean, I don't know, it's purpleizing, because of everybody moving there. But but there's a rich Republican tradition. So then people respect veterans and hate drugs, right? The people just are black and white on most of these issues. And so in like an evangelical Christian context, you'd be like, whoa, portals to the devil. And like in many ways, you and I know people with stories that represent that side of the argument.
Of course.
And
that's my context. Like I'm in Texas. That is my context.
Yeah. So, the people that have, it's not just bad trips, but there's research on like, if you have a propensity towards neuroses, like you can have a psychotic break. And all of these things are very dangerous technologies, but they are technologies in the sense, like they're tools as well. And so it's very fascinating to me. But anyway, the main thing I wanted to say is I've come to the conclusion that the doorway to demonic things is like, you're only seeing the negative in it when you express it that way. It's not that it's not true, but it's a doorway to the spiritual. And so there's like there's fork in the road moments there.
Yep.
And I'm not really recommending this as a practice. You know what I'm saying? Like,
of course.
But I think that I got into John Mark Comer a bunch and Dallas Willard and Richard Foster.
Me too.
And so all of that stuff is sort of the same thing. It's like, that's a weird thing to say, but
have you read Renovation of the Heart, Dallas Willard?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. We're completely on the same wavelength, because that book, one of the, like, you remember certain moments, and like one of the like not defining moments, but like just a moment I can remember in like visceral 1080, is I was sitting at a coffee shop in Dallas. I was already a believer. Like I had been this is a few years later. And but I was reading Renovation of the Heart by Dallas Willard, and I'd already read um what's it called, the big one,
The Divine Conspiracy.
yeah, I'd read The Divine Conspiracy. Amazing, was my favorite book at the time, and I'm reading Renovation of the Heart because I'm like, okay, like I love everything Dallas had to say. I want to get into like I want this change. Like I want to continue to grow spiritually. Like I've gone through this massive change to where I've like metanoia has really happened in my life, and I am now practicing the way, doing my best to practice the way. But I'm becoming like ever more so. I was on the part of the journey and still am, where you're becoming ever more so aware of the ways in which you are more deeply deformed than you possibly could have ever realized or been aware of, like down to the very like way in which I attend to the world, you know. And I was reading it at a coffee shop in Dallas, and I just remember the chapter about, I think it's the chapter where he describes like the renovated heart, the positive chapter, but it could also be the opposite, the chapter where he talks about like the ruined self. And there's a little section where he dissects Jesus' statement of what he means by die to yourself. Like take up your cross and follow me, to like die to yourself. And his description of that, like I just remember putting the book down, and I literally didn't pick it up again for like 6 months, because I read that and I was like, I think I knew exactly what he means because of my experience, like how radically I changed. The mushroom trip was one part of that, but like how radically I had a change of not just my morality, not just like my stated like propositional layer beliefs, but like my whole life, like the way I attended to the world, the way I view my relationship. Like you could say in a way my entire past changed because the way I viewed it changed, who I was changed. So like my entire life changed in like a 3-month period. And I was like, man, that was terrifying. And I'm on the other side of it now, and I've reached some stability. And to go into that voluntarily and to think about that happening again and maybe continually over and over and over is terrifying. So I'm going to put this book down for 6 months because I'm terrified. Like I feel like I was staring it in the face. Like I knew to die to yourself actually means to die. Like who you are is actually going to die. And you can talk around it all you want, but he uses that metaphor for a reason, because it's not really a metaphor. So anyways, I think to touch one more on the psychedelics, like with reference to specifically that, like I think you're completely right that everybody focuses on the negative side. Oftentimes, I think for very, very good reasons. But in my experience, what made it such a positive experience for me was that it was couched within this, my framework already shifting, so that when I had this experience, it wasn't like the actual experience itself wasn't like particularly Christian in nature. It was more like a general spiritual experience of like like the fresh snow. It's the only way I can really describe it. Of realizing like, whoa, I had a ton of woven tracks. I can like actually see them like in mind's eye. Like I can see all these things that are like sort of like ornaments on a tree, and they could be removed and new ornaments could be put on, better ornaments. And that was the experience. And then when you come back down from that, I had this framework that I was walking into of Christianity that Jordan and the people I knew and all these other areas I'd been convinced was true. And so I think if you want to understand that the psychedelic thing in the best way, it's like in isolation, super dangerous. In a situation like a therapeutic situation, slightly less dangerous. Still, I think you got to be careful who's doing the therapy. What is there? What is the telos of that therapeutic design or movement? But as an experience that happens maybe within a context where, like, couched within a community and within like a genuine movement in one's life from other influences, such that it can be a catalyzing event, not the worst thing. But at the same time, I'm well aware that can't be systematized. I would never prescribe it, never have. oftentimes when I tell my story, I completely leave it out because, like you said, in my context, people are like, "Bro, what?" Like, we don't have
Yeah.
in our non-denominational, surface level Protestant Christian understanding. Like, I don't have a category for that.
That's like the backsliding right before you really get saved. Like,
and I'm like, and I'm saying like, no, that was not part of the backsliding. That was like a very crucial part of the journey. But I just often leave it out and like paper over it with pretty like generic Christian language of transformation because I'm like, people, what I'm trying to communicate by telling you that, you can hear it. You have ears to hear it. Many people don't have ears to hear it, so there's no reason for me to communicate that,
One last thing, and then I think it's a good transition. So, psychedelic is like to bring out what is in your soul.
Yep.
And so, like, that's the word, what the word means. And so, that's what I'm getting at with the formational teachings of Willard, Comer, and Foster. And Comer's really just synthesizing the other guys. But, like, the idea that your life is formed by habits is sort of, you would say, unrelated to this, like what is in your soul. But that the idea is that you are being formed at a soul level on a daily basis. And so what I always encourage people to do is to pray silently, because it's the point at which you recognize God reaching out to you. And I think that when he takes your hand, that is the most formational experience anyone can have. And it's not just a momentary experience. It's, an eternal experience. And so when you are in that place of being formed, directly by God, like, in community, in church, in your family, whatever, through relationship, but specifically with God, I think that you're brought to these places where, like, this might ruffle some feathers, but John on the Isle of Patmos, he's not having a run-of-the-mill, sermon analogy. It's like, it's pretty wild. And even if you just say like, well, he's painting with bright colors the story of the Old Testament all the way through the New Testament, but like, it's really, psychedelic is the word we use. And so with that, I just want, that's sort of my conclusion is like, I think that you go to places where you're not meant to be. And so, like people climb Mount Everest, no oxygen, and they're psychos, and nobody can do that. But 10 people on the planet at a time maybe can do that. And they work really hard and have a genetic predisposition to store oxygen or whatever it is. And they develop the capacity to be there, only for a moment. But that is something that I think is akin to the spiritual journey with God. Like, you can move into a place where you have these altered states of consciousness that reveal to you something true and good and beautiful, and not something that is the point, right? The point is always your relationship, the condition of your soul, the love that you receive and can give, but the experiences are similar. And so when you utilize substances, you are not prepared, but you go to the same place. So it's like, I'm going to fly in a helicopter all the way to the top and then just see what happens. It's like, whoa, don't do that. That's a bad idea for most people,
Totally.
But I think in your case, you had like a Sherpa that went with you, spiritually or something. To help you get back down.
I definitely invoked the Sherpa of Sherpas. So I think he was with me, and what you said. I think of James K.A. Smith. You are what you love. I think one other way to phrase this that's maybe helpful is like, in that experience, I was able to be separated from my loves. In a way, like you said, your soul brought bare. Like I almost, it's like my loves were cast out of me for me to actually be able to see. And then when the experience is over the next couple months, it's like the experience, like the phenomenological experience stops. But over the next couple of months, I was in a place where I'm like, I actually specifically invited Christ to stand next to me and to continue to view those loves, and one by one, just knock them down. Like, this is not, like, he's sitting there saying to me, like, this is not me, this is not me, this is not me. they're too high on the hierarchy. If you want to use like Pajot's language, they need to be knocked down, you know?
Yeah.
And he did that in some ways that were out of my control. And then there were other ways in which some of those idols, with his help, I was able to just cast off myself, where I was like, I realized, hey, smoking weed, terrible for me. I smoked weed 400 days in a row, even as an elite athlete. At night, I'm like, had all these all the justifications, like really high level justifications. And you know, like Jesus just said, like, stop. Like it's at a place that's above me in a hierarchy, and nothing can be above me. And so I quit cold turkey after like 400 days in a row. And by the way, he gave that to me as a gift. I didn't experience anything negative from, in fact, it was immediately positive, which for a lot of people would be a much longer journey. And it was the same with other, you know, with pornography and masturbation, all those kinds of things too, just fell off, because he stood next to me and said, like, I've now put this in a place where you can actually see it for what it is. And then it becomes obvious, because once you put something up next to Christ, like, it pales in comparison. But it's really difficult, because without that separation, which I think you're saying, like, I think can happen from, and probably now what I would counsel is it can happen in silent prayer. Like, that's where you'll get to that place where Christ will come alongside you, and those things will bubble up. If you can actually get to a place of like silence, which is a whole, you know, that's a whole nother journey in and of itself, to even get like 5 minutes of actual internal silence. But that's where those things will come up, and he will come alongside you. And I learned that could be where it could happen on a day-to-day basis. And I didn't need to like take shrooms again. And I didn't need to do those things. Like, no, I can enter into contemplative prayer. And so that was it seems like that was a big part of both of our journeys, was following like Willard and Foster and those guys. And then for me, it led to like Pajot and Vervaeke and a lot of that stuff, which I, you know, hearing your story, it sounds like it did too, into this more sort of this wider view or wider picture of all this, you know?
Yeah. It's funny. So I just started, the Peterson Academy lecture series that Pajot has. And it's just about symbolism. So I'm sure it's pretty much encapsulating, you know, everything that he always talks about. But he mentioned, the hierarchy idea. And that's pretty much exactly what I'm getting at, is like, we put these things above actually, you know, having a relationship with Jesus. That's a pretty common turn of phrase, but when we do that, like, you can do it with things that are culturally bad and marked out as that is not Christian or good or, you know, American. And I would say maybe like psychedelics are a form of that, because you can place those drugs, those tools at such a high level that you're chasing the experience, the feeling, all of those things, even the spirituality of it all or something. And the same thing is possible with contemplative prayer, with Bible reading, with all of those practices. And so we sort of, you know, it's like workaholism. It sneaks right by, because it's actually pretty much the ethos of our culture. And so if you're a workaholic, it's like, yeah, you probably should scale back, but you're doing a great job. Keep going. You know, it's like,
have you read Joseph Piper's Leisure?
No.
Oh man. Banger.
I'm writing it down.
Banger. Leisure, the Basis of Culture. It's only about 65 or 70 pages. Maybe 100. And I just read it a few weeks ago at the suggestion of a friend, a TLC friend, and it's wonderful and speaks to exactly that. It's like he's writing in the wake of World War II. He's a German philosopher and a Christian, a Catholic, and he is writing essentially saying, like, we're rebuilding our country, but according to what value structure are we going to rebuild it? Like, are we going to rebuild it according to the utilitarian mindset of like a total work? Because that's what's going to lead to the same kind of thing happening again, effectively, is what. And so he goes into like the answer to that the ancients had, to go back to Plato and the church and everything, was a true recovery of leisure and worship. It's, anyways, you will like love it.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry if I ruined your train of thought.
No. The thing that I wanted to push towards is like, in our lives, you and me, we had this experience of coming to age through deeply ancient traditional philosophies and religious traditions
Yep.
that were sort of presented to us in a way that, at least for me, I connected with Peterson through the Joe Rogan podcast and then his biblical lectures, like right after that next video. And I was like, whoa, because I was familiar with a popular Sunday school level analysis of Genesis, and I had disconnected in my teenage years from sort of the seriousness of Scripture. And so I, through whatever processes, had imbibed that global understanding of Christianity, where it's sort of like, yeah, everybody around me thinks it, but I don't know if it really makes that big of a difference. It's not really relevant. And so I eventually started saying, like, I'm not a Christian. Like, none of the things that you would identify as someone being a Christian mark me out against anybody else. So that was, I think, a helpful move for me, because growing up in a Christian environment, it's like, yeah, I'm white and I'm Christian. Those two things are just practical realities about me. But so when Peterson was talking about these things, I was just like blown away at the depth of truth that he was pulling from them. And it's so interesting because recently on the podcast, I've been talking about essentially a substance ontology versus a relational ontology.
Yeah.
And I've been talking about it in terms of Christian apologetics, because when you make everything a material proposition, you are sort of forced to, your back's against the wall. Like, you have to fight to the death about 6-day creationism or whatever derivative they're in. Like, you can take the evolutionary.
You get yourself into some really difficult pickles, for sure.
Yeah, and then everything falls apart. I don't know if you heard me, but I was talking about Rhett and Link. It's so fascinating to me that they deconstructed because they read a book about evolution. I'm like, if I read a book about evolution, it would deeply challenge a lot of the ways that I was raised to think about science growing up. But even if I concluded, I think that this is true, even though it's a very difficult thing to prove to be true, I would say, like, it's true and God is real. There's no connection in my mind to the experience I have of God and the overarching understanding of the reality of God that I have. And yet for them, they were in an environment where those things are integrally linked, to where if you pull one pin out, the whole thing collapses around you. And
absolutely,
I think some people think that, like, oh, that means you were never saved. It's like, well, no, it means that the qualifications for being saved are believing all these things that we have set before you, and we just keep repeating them every Sunday to you so that you have that understanding. But anyway, so the relational ontology idea is something that I'm getting a little bit more familiar with. So another way to think of it is, like, instead of it just being material propositions, like, we definitely know something that happened 6,000 years ago that nobody could ever know, you deal with things on the level of personal experience. And I just saw a tweet from John Vervaeke today about religion. He said, if your religion is something that, essentially, like, something that you came up with that you like because it feels good, and that it just runs through the filter of your own logic, you can't grow. And I think that's a really profound way of saying it's not a religion. It doesn't hold anything together,
Mm-hmm.
And so I started this to try to say, like, we have a similar experience and we've come to similar conclusions through similar channels, so I'm wondering about other people that are like us, not just in the TLC area, but like in our lives, the people around you that you see going through similar sort of modern struggles in a world where everything is material. So it's like, oh yeah, Christianity doesn't make any sense. And Christianity is trying to be material. That doesn't make sense either.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get people to connect with, the things that we've connected with?
Yeah, I think it's difficult in my particular environment. I'm around way more people who are like you were when you were younger, which is like Christian just by default, sort of. And I don't mean that like in a totally cultural way where they're like not genuinely following Christ. No, like I'm around a lot of people who really like they love Christ and they want to follow him and all this. But the way in which they understand um is that substance ontological understanding. And but they're in an environment where like that's not really pushed back against. It's just like, I mean, everybody here, pretty much everybody's Baptist or like Baptist Light or like charismatic Baptist. And it's just like, even and if you're not one of those variations of Baptist, you're like probably Reformed Protestant. Like it's, and so you're not very far away. Like maybe you're Presbyterian or something, but like we still maybe we disagree about the Eucharist and infant baptism, but like largely our ontology is still the same. Like we're arguing a lot of the same things. And so it's a little bit of a different problem than I think if I were to still be in North Carolina, where I think I'd be around a lot more people who are antithetical to Christianity for the reasons that you say. But it's where I am, it's just this really interesting thing because I think, especially the more I talk to Jordan and the more I've been influenced by TLC and these things, I'm like, man, like here in like late stage modernity and where we're at, like the Christianity that I see around me is like, it seems pretty fragile. Like I think the communities are very strong. Like, I think I actually am in a community and I've been around communities that have a really, really high level of robustness because of like communal ties and just like a lot of things, like the way our church is a lot of the churches here are like really healthily structured in some important ways that I think give like they're very robust because of that. And so I'm not saying like, oh, they're so fragile that if anything happens, all these people are going to deconvert or whatever. The church is going to split apart. But I do think there is an inherent fragility that comes from this. So yeah, that substance ontological understanding of the Bible and of the faith, and like pastors, being young Earth creationists, like and not in like a super educated way. It's more like I took a couple classes at DTS on my way to becoming a pastor, Dallas Theological Seminary, which is, I don't know if you know much about it, but very very single. You're going to learn one way of thinking from that place, to say. And so it's like, oh, of course, it's, of course we're young Earth creationists, and of course, the certain theological positions and ways of viewing things. And so my context is interesting because I want to gently try to call people higher and deeper. And I don't want to, but you also have to be careful because you're like, I don't want people to question things in a way that's just like in the name of questioning, like being right about the propositions. Like I don't want to just like challenge your propositions so that you can adopt my propositions or my lack of proposition and my mystery, because you might not be comfortable with that like mystery or that lack, in a way that I am, because I'm bent this way. Like I'm a seeker, I'm curious, all these things. Not everybody's like that. And so being aware of that makes it difficult because you're like, I don't want to like, Paul Vandeclay always says, kick you in your axioms. I don't want to like take a baseball bat to your axioms. And then the result is that you go down a rabbit hole that you don't necessarily have the skill as like you go into some waters where you don't have the skill as a sailor to navigate. And then you deconstruct or something, or you lose like what was healthy about your Christian walk. And so all that to say, it's a really difficult problem because in some ways I think it's actually easy. I was just talking to Jordan Hall again and Annie like a little while ago, and like Jordan said something that stuck with me was that like we and our families and our communities, even our Christian communities, like, are the mission field. Like we don't need to be going to Africa for the mission field. And in some ways, like he's saying, you're heaping condemnation on yourself if you bring modernity and the machine, to use like the King's North term. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but like if you bring the seeds of modernity in the machine with you as a missionary to Africa, and you think all you're bringing is the simple gospel, and you actually bring with it like your extremely modern Western machine-like version of Christianity with you, you're heaping condemnation on yourself. And just because you said the name of Jesus, and you brought the term Jesus, and like it doesn't mean that you didn't do something very, very wrong. And so he was like, we need to start with ourselves first and then our families and our communities, because we are actually the mission field, because we are all like, I don't want to say infected, but like we are infected by this. You call it a substance ontology. Jordan would say it's a third person versus first person relationship with reality. Like you can name it. There's just a general like dualism. Like you can name it a bunch of different ways. But that's like that within ourselves is the mission field. Like we need the light of the Logos to shine, like in those places in ourselves, in our families, in our communities. Like I said, and that's a tough problem, man. Like,
yeah.
Like I'm trying to do. I've been trying to do that work in myself for like 5-6 years. As I've learned more about it, I'm like, I hear Jonathan Pageau talking about the early church, and I'm reading, Maximus the Confessor and Gregory of Nyssa. I read The Life of Moses earlier this year, and just recovering that way of reading scripture and thinking about theosis and all these things. I'm like, it's, building block after block of trying to recover that in myself. And I think that's probably the first step, is like, if I can do that for myself and then model that for at least my children and my wife and maybe our close friends, maybe that's all I can do. Especially if I'm not a pastor. If I was a pastor, I think we'd have a different, because I have serious problems with how a lot of pastors are teaching, and my own too. And I would tell them that I don't care. And the reason I like latched onto John Mark, I think John Mark, I wish I could like forcibly take him and make him listen to some TLC content, because he's like so close. He's like right there. I'm like, man, we need people like you preaching in churches from this point of view. He's awesome. And I'm like, I think there's more steps he could take, but he is like somebody to point to, him and Tyler Staton, who took over at Bridgetown from him. I'm like, those guys are trying to preach and teach in such a way that they take you out of yourself in a miniature version of that psychedelic experience, take you out of yourself on that Sunday, or that moment where you're reading their books, or that moment when you engage in prayer that they suggested you engage in. They're trying to take you out of that and like allow you to glimpse like something different, which is what we need.
Yeah. You said, the tree with the ornaments, and those were sort of the idols in your life, or even just the affect of your ego, sort of tennis and from North Carolina, these parts of your identity that were mutable, and you recognized that they were, just placed on top of whatever it is that you are. And I've been thinking, I know you've got to run in like 10 minutes. Is that we got 10?
I have to run probably in the next like 2 to 3 minutes, actually.
Okay.
But
I'll wrap it up then.
We could also like pause this and then like we could do another conversation and stitch them together. So I don't know. It's up to you. You have the podcast, but I was just clearly we're just getting started, which I hate. I'm sorry, I have to go. But.
No. We'll definitely do a part 2, so don't worry about it. And this might be a nice segue. I'll recommend people go listen to this one after we do the next one. But the idea of you being a self and having certain things that you can remove from yourself and new things can be put on. It's almost like Paul talks about the old man and the new man. And the man is these things that go on top of you. You're animating these things. And so anyway, one thing that we didn't get to today, but we'll definitely get to in the next conversation, is the idea of the form versus the function. Another way to put it is the medium is the message. And I think that this is such a huge issue in our culture, because I heard you talking, I think it was you. Yeah, it was you with Christian talking about the way that your family is fragmented just by way of moving to different locations, and that you don't have some things that you've seen other families have that you want your family, you and your wife and your kids, to have together, and then on down the generations. And so that's just one aspect of this medium is the message. Like,
yes,
if if you don't recognize sort of the water that you're swimming in, it it affects you. You know, like you have fins for a reason to navigate this water. You have you can't breathe pure oxygen for a reason because you
Yep.
live in water. And so when we're talking about like what's best or what's natural, or we need to address these sorts of things. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. I think this was a great
Yeah, dude.
introduction.
Let's talk again soon because this was fun to get started. We really just got rolling, so I look forward to it.